They told me she hadn't said a word since the night it happened. Not to the doctors, not to the cops, not even to herself. When I got the call, I was halfway through a bad cup of coffee and a worse morning. Rain on the blinds, half a city asleep under the hum of cheap neon. Captain Rourke said the words that pull every detective back from the edge of quitting. "We've got a live one." Except she wasn't exactly alive in the usual sense. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and fear, both fresh. I walked in slow, trench coat still dripping, notebook under my arm. She was sitting upright in bed, arms around her knees, eyes fixed on something invisible just past the wall. Her chart said her name was Evelyn Marsh, 24. Found in an alley behind a nightclub on Ash Street. Blood on her dress, not hers. No ID, no phone, no explanation. Just a body in shock and a case file thinner than the morning paper. "Miss Marsh?" I asked. My voice echoed too easily in the white room. "Nothing." She blinked once, slow. Not fear, not confusion, calculation. Like she was watching me watch her. The nurse, a tired woman with eyes that had seen too much, stood by the door. "She hasn't spoken since they brought her in," she whispered. "Any idea what she saw?" "She saw enough to stop talking," I said. The nurse gave me a look, pity maybe. Then she left us alone. I sat down across from Evelyn. She followed the movement with her eyes but didn't turn her head. I opened my notebook. "Evelyn," I said soft. "You don't have to talk if you don't want to. But I need to know what happened. Whoever did this, he's still out there." No reaction. Just the faint tremor of her hand as she brushed a lock of hair from her face. Then she did something strange. She raised her left hand, slowly, and traced a shape in the air. A circle. Then a line through it. And that was all. Later, in the hallway, Rourke was waiting. He had that look, half cigar smoke, half suspicion. "Well? She's not talking." "Then you make her." "It's not that simple. She's not refusing. She's gone." He snorted. "You've been doing this too long, Pierce. Everyone talks eventually. It's just a matter of how much silence you can stand before you break." "Maybe she's not the one who's supposed to break," I said. He didn't like that. Rourke never liked things he couldn't control. He left me there with a half-burned look and a full set of unanswered questions. That night I couldn't sleep. Her face stayed with me, not scared, not broken. Just still. The city outside my window hummed like a dying machine. Sirens, drizzle, a drunk shouting at the darkness. Normal. All of it normal. But in the middle of all that noise, her silence felt louder than anything else. I poured another drink and stared at the circle she'd drawn in the air. I didn't know why, but I sketched it down in my notes anyway. A circle. A line. 2 strokes that meant nothing, and everything. The next morning, I went back. Her room was empty. Bed made, machines off, chart gone. Nurse said she was transferred to another ward. Admin said no such transfer existed. Rourke said to drop it. "She's a witness, not your problem." But when I checked the police database, her file wasn't there either. No Evelyn Marsh. No case number. Nothing. As if she never existed at all. And yet on my desk, in the corner of my notebook, the symbol was still there, ink slightly smudged, like someone had touched it with a wet finger. That's when I noticed the envelope. No return address. Just my name, in typewriter font. Inside, a single photo. Evelyn Marsh, standing in front of a derelict building, the same blank look in her eyes. And behind her, spray-painted on the wall, that same circle with a line through it. Underneath the photo, 2 words in red ink. Don't let her speak. By the time I reached Ash Street, the sun had already drowned behind the skyline. The kind of dust that paints the whole city the color of ash, fitting, I guess. The photo in my pocket felt heavier than it should have. Every time I looked at that circle with the line symbol, my gut twisted like I'd seen it before. Ash Street used to be a living artery of the city, jazz bars, smoke, noise. Now it was just skeletons of places that didn't survive the rent hikes and the moral decay. The building from the photo stood at the corner like a bad memory, 4 stories tall, bricks sagging under the weight of years, windows black and hollow. No tape, no police markers. No sign it had ever been touched by official hands. I pulled my collar up and pushed the door open. It groaned, old wood, soaked with rain and secrets. Inside, dust and silence. The kind that sits heavy on your lungs. Graffiti coated the walls, names, tags, and symbols, some fresh, some older than the city ordinance that forgot this place existed. And there it was again. The same symbol, a circle, lined through it. Spray painted, scratched, carved, everywhere. I turned on my flashlight. The beam cut through dust like a scalpel. Broken glass glinted on the floor. A chair stood in the middle of the room, alone, perfectly upright. That's when I noticed something else. The air was cleaner in here. Not just dry, sterilized, like someone had tried to scrub time itself off the walls. And in that chair, a file. An honest-to-God manila folder, unmarked except for one line on the tab. Marsh, Evelyn, Subject 04. I opened it carefully. Inside were pages, hospital charts, photos, transcripts, all redacted to hell. Whole paragraphs blacked out. But one page stood out. Subject exhibits acute selective mutism. Cognitive function intact. Memory retrieval inconsistent. When shown symbol O/, subject becomes nonverbal, displays physiological distress. Below that, a handwritten note in a different ink. Don't let her draw it again. Something clattered in the dark behind me. I froze. My light hit a figure by the doorway, not moving, just watching. Male, tall, coat darker than the shadows around him. I called out, "Police! Show me your hands." He didn't move. Didn't speak. Then, just as my finger brushed the trigger on instinct, he stepped backward and vanished into the dark. Not running, not afraid. Just gone. I followed into the hall, gun up. Nothing. No footsteps. No exit. Only the faint smell of something I couldn't name, metallic, sterile, the same as the hospital room. When I got back to my car, I found a fresh envelope on the windshield. Typed the same way as before. No return address. Inside, a photocopy of the file page I just read, but this time, the redacted lines were gone. And now I could read the name of the organization behind the report. Project Mnemosyne, Division of Behavioral Silence. I got back to my apartment past midnight. The city lights outside buzzed through the blinds, jittery and unreal. I pinned the photo and the file to the wall, stared at them until they blurred into one. Mnemosyne. The name rang a bell, Greek mythology, the goddess of memory. Cute name for a government project that erases people. I poured a drink, half whiskey, half insomnia, and sat by the window. The rain was steady, the kind that hides every sound you don't want to hear. But even through it, I thought I heard something faint, a voice, almost whispering, like someone trying to speak underwater. I turned off the lamp. Silence. Then a knock. 3 times. Slow. I opened the door, hand on the revolver. Nobody there. Only another envelope, slid under the crack. Inside, a photo. Not of Evelyn this time. Of me. Standing in the same hospital room, staring at her. Same lighting, same angle, only I hadn't taken it. And at the bottom, typed in red, "She can still see you." By the time the sun scraped over the skyline, I hadn't slept a minute. The photo of me and Evelyn sat on the desk like evidence in someone else's case. It wasn't just the picture, it was the timestamp burned into the corner, 3:42 a.m. I was home at that time. I was sure of it. Almost sure. The file page with the Project Mnemosyne header was pinned above it. I'd seen the name before, somewhere in the archives. Something about witness protection, psychological intervention, maybe one of those black-budget government things that start as therapy and end in silence. I decided to start with the name at the bottom of the form, barely visible under the blur of a carbon copy. Dr. Elias Cormick, Department of Behavioral Science. I found him listed as a consultant at St. Germain Institute, a private psychiatric center out near the river. Never heard of it before. That's always a bad sign, means someone spent good money to keep it that way. The place looked less like a hospital and more like an old monastery dressed up in glass and white paint. 2 guards at the front gate, polite but blind to questions. I flashed my badge, told them it was an open investigation. They hesitated, then waved me in. That's the thing about uniforms. Flash one, and most people stop thinking. The receptionist looked too calm, too smooth. Every movement measured, rehearsed. When I asked for Dr. Cormick, she smiled, one of those smiles that never reaches the eyes. "I'm afraid Dr. Cormick doesn't take appointments." "This isn't an appointment," I said. "It's an interrogation." That took some of the shine out of her. She picked up the phone, murmured something. A minute later, a tall man in a gray suit appeared in the hall. No coat, no tie, no expression. "Detective Pierce," he said, already knowing my name. "I've been expecting you." Cormick's office looked like a church that got lost in a data center. Mahogany desk, soft light, and behind him, shelves full of cassette tapes, each labeled by date and number. No names. No words. He gestured for me to sit. I didn't. "I'm looking into a woman named Evelyn Marsh," I said. "You were her psychologist." His eyebrow twitched, almost human. "Evelyn was a subject, detective. Not a patient." "Right. And what kind of subject stops talking and disappears from every public record?" He smiled faintly. "The kind we're not meant to remember." I took a step closer. "Project Mnemosyne." "What is it?" "A memory containment study," he said. "Certain witnesses experience trauma so severe it threatens the structure of recall. We isolate the memory to protect the mind. By silencing them." He tilted his head. "By removing the noise. Sometimes speech carries more than sound. It carries contagion." I almost laughed. "You're saying she caught something from talking?" "I'm saying she saw something no one should describe." He rose, walked to one of the shelves, and pulled out a cassette. Labeled Subject 04, Final Session. He slid it into a player on the desk and pressed play. At first, just static. Then a faint voice, feminine, trembling. "Evelyn's. I don't want to remember," she said. "They said if I speak, it starts again." A pause. Then another voice, male, calm. "Cormick's. What starts again, Evelyn?" She hesitated. And then, in a whisper so soft it made the air feel wrong. "The circle." The tape snapped to silence. Cormick stopped the player, ejected the tape, and placed it on the desk between us. "Every patient described the same symbol," he said. "Before they stopped speaking altogether." "Every patient?" He nodded. "For subjects. Evelyn was the last." What happened to the others? His eyes didn't move. They completed the process. Something about that word chilled me more than any threat could. Completed. Like it was a task, not a life. Detective, he said quietly, if you care about your witness, leave her case alone. Some silences protect more than they hide. I leaned over the desk. And who protects them from you? He didn't answer. But as I turned to leave, I caught sight of something on his shelf, half hidden behind the rows of tapes. A photo. Evelyn again. Standing beside Cormac, smiling, years younger. And behind them, a banner on the wall that read, Project Mnemosyne, Phase I Trials. Dated 7 years ago. Outside, the rain started again. The kind of slow, soaking rain that turns the whole city into a reflection. I stood under it, watching the building, waiting for something, anything, to move behind the glass. Nothing did. But when I reached for my lighter, I noticed something scratched into the back of my badge, faint, but deliberate. A small circle. A single line through it. And suddenly, I wasn't sure who'd been watching whom. I clicked it open that night, sitting on my apartment floor with the rain still clawing at the window. But when the flame flared up, it didn't look right. For a second, it burned blue, cold and steady, like it wasn't consuming anything at all. Then it went out. And in that brief darkness, I realized I couldn't remember lighting it the first time. Just the sound. Just the click. By morning, my reflection was late. I mean that literally. I moved, and it followed a fraction of a second too slow. The kind of delay you notice only when you're already questioning your sanity. I didn't go back to Saint Germain. Not yet. Instead, I drove to the precinct and pulled up every record tied to Project Mnemosyne. There were none. Not even classified entries, just blank database lines where file IDs should have been. Like someone had ripped pages out of the city's memory. But there was something else. A missing person report dated 6 years ago. Filed by a detective Nathaniel Pierce. The subject, Evelyn Marsh. Filed, then withdrawn, 3 days later. I stared at it until the letters blurred. Then I printed it out, just to feel the weight of it. The paper was fresh, new, not something from years ago. Someone had rewritten history. And somehow, I was in both versions. I went to see Captain Halvorsen, my supervisor, the only person left who might remember the older cases. He was sitting at his desk, half buried in files, looking like he'd been there since the building opened. When I asked about Project Mnemosyne, he didn't look up. He just said, "Never heard of it." Then, quieter, "And you shouldn't have either." I pressed him, but the more I did, the more vacant his expression became. Like he was slipping out of the conversation one thought at a time. "Halvorsen," I said. "We've got a woman who vanished, a doctor who edits minds, and my own name in a report I don't remember writing. I need something." He looked at me then, not angry, not scared, just tired. "Pierce," he said, "you ever think maybe you weren't supposed to remember?" And before I could answer, he opened a drawer and slid an envelope across the desk. "Found this in your old locker. You turned it in when you took your leave." "I never took a leave." "Then maybe you didn't," he said. The envelope was thick. Inside were photos, hundreds of them. All of the same thing, a room. 4 white walls, a single chair, a cassette recorder on a table. And in the middle of every photo, me. Different angles, different expressions, but always the same moment, my mouth open, as if I was about to say something. And the same timestamp on every shot, 3:42 a.m. That night, I couldn't bring myself to go home. I walked instead through alleys, across bridges, down streets that seemed too quiet. Every sound was too clean, too deliberate. like the world was waiting for a cue. I ended up at a diner near the East Docks. The kind that still had neon signs that buzzed and menus printed on yellowing paper. The waitress poured me coffee without asking. She looked tired in the way that means she's seen more than she should. When I asked if she knew a woman named Evelyn Marsh, she froze mid-motion. Then she said, "She used to come here. Sat right there." She pointed to the booth across from me. "But she didn't talk much. Not after, you know." "After what?" "She got quiet. Like something took her words and didn't give them back." When I left the diner, the air outside felt heavier. Like the city itself was leaning in, listening. I lit a cigarette. The lighter flame flickered blue again. And when I exhaled, the smoke didn't drift, it hung there, coiling into a faint circular shape before dissolving. That's when I heard it. Faint, under the hum of the streetlights. A whisper, not words, just rhythm. Like breathing in reverse. And behind it, a sound I hadn't realized I'd missed. A voice. My own. Saying something I couldn't hear clearly. Repeating, over and over. "You were in the room." I went home after that. Or at least, I went to an address that claimed to be mine. The door unlocked with my key. The furniture was the same, but the walls were bare. No photos, no maps, no trace of Evelyn. In the corner of the room sat a small tape recorder, already running. The reel spun slowly, whispering under the soft hiss of static. I picked it up, pressed rewind, then play. There was my voice again. Calm, methodical. Day 14. The silence persists. Subject reports auditory dissociation. Visual repetition at 3:42 persists. Recommend continuation of treatment. And then another voice, Cormac's. Good. Keep recording. We'll review after the next session. That was 2 days ago. Or at least I think it was. Time doesn't hold its shape anymore. The only thing I know for sure is that the circle keeps showing up, in reflections, in the lighter flame, even in the way the clouds form above the skyline at night. And sometimes, when the city goes quiet, I swear I can hear Evelyn humming. Just a low, trembling melody, somewhere between sorrow and warning. But when I follow it, when I try to trace the sound, it always leads me back to the same place. My own door. And every time I open it, there's another tape waiting. The tape clicked itself on at 3:42 a.m. again. It always did. Didn't matter if I was awake or not. Didn't matter if the power was out. The reel just started turning, quiet, deliberate, steady. And my voice filled the room. Day 21. Subject demonstrates full speech restoration. However, memory integrity remains unstable. Repetition of prior data likely. The voice sounded calm, clinical, but it was mine. No doubt about that. I sat there in the dark, listening to myself document a life I couldn't remember living. Half of me wanted to shut it off. The other half wanted to keep it going, because maybe, somewhere in that loop, I'd hear the truth. The tape went on. Subject continues to display circular thinking patterns. Language loops are consistent with early mnemosony exposure. Recommend termination of current iteration. Termination. That word again. Always polite, always final. The reel stopped spinning. Then, faintly, from somewhere deep inside the machine, like a whisper through old film, I heard another voice. Not mine. Not Cormac's. Evelyn's. She said, "You're not the detective anymore." I don't remember standing up, but I must have, because suddenly I was at the mirror again. The same one that had lagged behind before. This time, it didn't move at all. It just watched. And then, after a moment, the reflection smiled. Not me. It. I packed a bag and left the apartment, if it was even mine, and drove toward the river. Something about the night felt too still, like the air was holding its breath. I followed the shoreline until the road gave way to gravel, then to mud. And there it was. A building I'd never seen, but that felt familiar in the way a recurring dream does, half remembered, half inevitable. A concrete block, windowless. On the front, a faded sign that read St. Germain Institute, Archive Facility. The padlock was gone. The door was open. Inside, it smelled like dust and electricity. The hallways were lined with steel cabinets, each labeled with a single word. Iteration. No numbers. No names. I walked deeper. My footsteps echoed like someone else was walking just behind me. Then I found the recording room. The same one from the photos, the chair, the table, the recorder. And on the wall behind it, painted in flaking red letters, "The witness that never spoke." Underneath, a smaller line of text, half faded. Project Mnemosyne, Unit P13. I didn't have to think too hard to know what the P stood for. There was a file sitting on the table. Thick, worn, stamped deactivated. Inside were photos, mine. Notes, mine. Session transcripts, mine. And one final form, signed by Dr. Cormack. Subject Pierce demonstrates severe recursive cognition. Believes himself to be investigator of own case. Recommended protocol, silent loop retention. Vocal output restricted. Memory reset scheduled 3:42 a.m. I don't know how long I stood there, reading that line over and over. It didn't make sense, but it made too much sense at the same time. I wasn't investigating Evelyn. I was replacing her. When the circle closes, it doesn't end. It just begins again, with a new voice pretending to ask the right questions, never realizing it's just another recording playing itself. And maybe that's what mnemosyne really meant. Not memory, but repetition. The eternal echo. The song that can't stop singing because it never knew how to begin. The tape recorder on the table started turning again. I didn't press anything. Didn't touch it. It just began to play. And there I was, my voice again, soft, distant. Statement 1. Detective Nathaniel Pierce, assigned to the case of Evelyn Marsh. The witness refuses to speak. I tried to stop it. But every time I reached for the button, my hand hesitated, like muscle memory fighting orders it didn't agree with. The voice continued. If anyone finds this, don't listen. It only starts again. It only. The reel snapped. Silence. It's strange, writing this down now. I don't remember when I started, or where I got the paper, or who I'm even addressing. All I know is if you're reading this, if you've come this far, you're part of it too. You've heard the echo. You've stepped into the circle. And when the clock hits 3:42, you'll understand what the silence is for.